Hi, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. Well, what's been in the buzz lately? Well, perimenopause. Everything menopause has been buzzing like crazy, and perimenopause, maybe even more so than postmenopause for the moment. So you could say, what the heck is perimenopause? Well, it's on the spectrum of what? Hormonal decline, hormonal shifting associated with ovarian senescence or aging. Remember, the word menopause is an unfortunate choice because it makes it sound like it's all about the end of periods. Remember, even if you don't have a uterus, you still have ovarian aging and the equivalent of menopause. So remember, what is menopause anyway? The definition: 12 consecutive months without any vaginal bleeding. And that is a very late stage issue, okay, event. So what's happening in the decade before that official last period and then the 12 months that goes afterwards? Well, that's the now called perimenopause, but it's all about ovarian aging. So what are some of the different signs and symptoms that women experience years, even like 10 years before they end up officially as menopausal? Now, remember, many doctors, myself included, don't wait for women to stop having periods for a year before we would consider them candidates for treatment of a variety of sorts, including hormonal and lifestyle interventions. So remember, that's an arbitrary, man-made up definition. So let's talk about what's really going on. Well, the ovaries during perimenopause are changing in terms of how they're producing the hormones estradiol, the estrogen made by the ovaries, and its sidekick, progesterone. Now, why are the hormones changing in their production? Well, because the number of eggs, the supply of eggs, is declining. Not only is the supply declining, but egg quality, the quality of the eggs themselves to make babies and to help create hormones, is on the decrease, okay? It's downsliding. And so the perimenopause is associated with a very rapid decline in fertility. It's all linked together. Remember, this is how nature did it. Here is hormones, here is reproduction. They're completely interconnected. As perimenopause is pursuing its end course towards menopause, fertility is declining and hormone production becomes more erratic, unpredictable, with the ultimate issue of declining. And right now in nature, we cannot separate hormones from reproduction. We are doing that when we give hormone replacement therapy. Nature never expected us to be doing that, and we're going to talk more and more and more about that, but not in this episode. What we're going to talk about are what are the sequelae of perimenopause, the different symptoms. And I'm not going to talk about the covert symptoms or the covert issues. What is the difference? There's overt, the things you see and feel, and covert, the things that are happening silently that you cannot feel. We'll talk about them, but not in this episode. So this episode, we're going to talk about the things that you, if you haven't and you're not there yet, and you will be, more likely than not, you will notice maybe all of them or some of them. To what degree? It's highly variable. Every unique woman goes through the uniqueness of her own perimenopause and menopause in terms of symptomatology. So the number one thing you need to know right out the gate is that never assume a symptom, whatever it is that you're feeling or noticing, is due to perimenopause. That would be a diagnosis of exclusion. In other words, you have to rule out that whatever you're feeling is not due to something like a heart problem or iron deficiency or anemia or a thyroid problem or some other problem, okay, like an autoimmune disease. Don't make assumptions. That's why there are doctors like me in this world to make sure that you get the right diagnosis and the right treatment. Okay, so let's say you have some of the symptoms I'm going to describe and you have it ruled out, you don't have something else going on. Good. We don't want you to have more problems. Perimenopause is enough of a thing to deal with. So, what are some of the symptoms? Well, when you go through perimenopause, and like I said, every woman is different. And many women, however, will have wide fluctuations in their estradiol production. So their brain is trying to regulate estradiol, but the ovaries are not so good at making estradiol anymore, the estrogen from the ovaries. So there are what you call too low and too high, like overshoots. So your ovaries make too little. The brain says, it has sensors to estradiol, says, I want more, make more estradiol. And it will put out through the pituitary gland a big bolus of FSH and LH. And that will trigger more testosterone to be produced. And from testosterone comes estradiol. You can have a surge of estradiol. That's the only time when there's a natural case of estradiol dominance, when the ovary like overshoots and makes too much estradiol. I've seen levels as high as 800 picograms per mil. That's really high. And what happens in terms of symptoms? How does a woman feel when she has a giant shoot up of estradiol? Well, she may have a lot of breast tenderness. Oh my goodness, that is a very common symptom. She may have fluid retention and bloating because estradiol naturally tends to cause fluid retention, but normally not in the extreme. But when you have an extreme level of estradiol, you could have too much fluid retention. So you feel bloated and full and puffy, and you get migraines. So what triggers migraines? Maybe even for the first time in your life, or exacerbations of migraines you had before, maybe worse than before. Because what triggers a lot of migraines is the drop of estradiol. So estradiol goes up, and then it goes down, and then the brain says, hey, I want more, and that goes up, and then it naturally goes down. So you get these wild shoots up and down, but the general trajectory is down. So it's like up and down as it's trending downward. So that makes for so much instability in terms of how your brain is getting these hormones. And it's the drop of estradiol that is known to trigger migraines. So interestingly, one of the treatments for migraines, I didn't want to get into hormone therapy per se, but this is migraine therapy, is giving an estradiol patch, like a 0.1 milligram patch that can be used around the time of the period. But in the case of a perimenopausal woman, I recommend all the time. Just wear that patch. Now, what does that patch help to do? It helps to keep these wild swings from happening because the brain will always have sensors picking up a reasonable amount of estradiol. So hopefully you won't have these wild swings, which can trigger incapacitating migraines in some women. Of course, there are many other migraine drugs around, but wouldn't it be nice if we didn't need them and we just understood the underlying problem were these wild swings of estradiol? And then remember, along with that can come fluid retention, bloating, and what else? Mood swings. Oh my gosh, it can be so amazing for some women. They'd never even had mood swings before, and then they feel like good manic-ish, like up, and then they feel down, and then they feel up. And another something that happens emotionally is irritability, very irritable. Now, they want to, not intentionally, but they want to blow up. I mean, they don't want to, they just do. At their family, their kids, shopkeepers. It's like, whoa, waitresses. I call it road rage without the road, okay? And they just get so irritable, and then they're so upset with themselves. So one of the things that can help with that are the lifestyle tricks, which we're going to talk about before we end. So we have the migraines, the fluid retention, the mood swings, the irritability. And what else happens in the brain for a lot of women? This is well documented. Brain fog. And what is the biggest manifestation often? Memory problems and word recall. What kind of words do women tend to have problems with in the perimenopause? Nouns. So they're pretty good at remembering adjectives and verbs, but they can't remember names, the nouns. It's like, what was the name of that? Who was that again? What was the name of that person? Or where were we? Like what city? Or what was the name of the restaurant? What was the name of the show? They just can't remember nouns, names of things, but they can describe it often. They remember when it happened, but they can't remember where it happened. Okay, that's noun recall. But you can think of it as brain fog and just memory problems. And women think, oh my gosh, I'm getting demented. And I mean, you could say it is a bit of dementia, and it stabilizes. And of course, hormones can be helpful. But there's other things that we can talk about that are helpful too. Because why is this even happening? It's a combination of reduced mitochondrial function and inflammation, neuroinflammation in the brain. And there's a lot we can do with lifestyle to help and some targeted supplementation. So we'll go over that. Now, what about appetite? Oh my goodness. Many women have dysregulated appetite. They want to eat at night. Now, why would they want to eat at night? Maybe they never had the night munchies, and now they do. It's because estradiol is critical for maintaining proper function of the master clock. It's a group of neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a group of neurons that sits atop the optic nerve and can sense light and dark and nutrients. So that's one of the tools that we can utilize, light therapy and time-restricted eating, to help reset, to keep that master clock. The word is from drifting. And when it drifts, it impacts appetite. So you feel like dysregulated. So you may have no appetite in the morning, and then you're so hungry at 10 o'clock at night. You may be tired in the morning, and then you get this surge of energy, and you feel, whoa, I'm at my best now. It's 10 o'clock at night. Okay, that's not normal. That's circadian rhythm dysfunction. And it's typical in perimenopausal women. And what goes along with that? Weight gain. And who wants to gain weight? Not very many of us. Most of us would like to maintain or lose fat. We're not talking about losing muscle mass. We want more muscle mass, but we certainly don't want visceral fat, inflammatory fat. And that's what happens because one of the things that happens in perimenopause, and then it continues into menopause, is mitochondrial dysfunction. Estradiol is critical for maintaining proper function of the mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy creators. They're little organelles, little structures in the cells that create energy. And they're most prominent in the brain, in the heart, and they're in muscle. So you have less energy, less brain function, and you may not notice it, but things can happen in the heart. But that's things you don't notice. So we're not talking about the things you don't notice today. That's the covert stuff. But you will notice you have less energy to stay and later at night to work. I don't mean late at night. I mean like maybe 8 o'clock at night. You wanted to do something and you're just so tired. You just veg out in front of the TV set. Or, you really start to fall asleep if you go to a show at night. It's like 9 o'clock, I'm asleep. I'm dozing during the best part of the musical, whatever. Then you join the old people crowd that go to the matinee, right? Because you can't function in the evening. You're all pooped out. Your mitochondria are so tired. And the mitochondria do other things too. They control the cell cycle, but that's stuff you can't feel. So we're not going to talk about it more. But you can certainly feel when your brain is foggy. You can certainly feel when you have low energy and you don't want to exercise or you tire out quickly. You have low stamina. That's low mitochondrial production of energy. We do not like that. And that's what happens. Well, I mentioned that you have circadian rhythm dysfunction, which creates appetite dysregulation. It also involves sleep. So women have trouble sleeping. Remember, I mentioned that they often feel energized just when they should be going to sleep, and then they're tired in the morning when they should have plenty of energy. Oh, what else happens? Oh my goodness, they often wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and can't fall back to sleep because of phase disorder, circadian rhythm dysfunction. And sleep problems lead to every other kind of problem. If you don't have adequate sleep, you're going to gain weight, you're going to have mood problems, you're going to have insulin resistance, maybe go into diabetes, you increase your risk of cognitive dysfunction, dementia, and cancer. So circadian rhythm is no little matter, but it manifests in terms of symptoms in things like middle of the night awakening, problems falling asleep, all kinds of insomnia problems, and appetite dysregulation. So we'll talk about some of the things you can do without talking about hormones. We're not going to talk about giving hormones this particular episode. We're going to talk about other stuff. So what else? Well, there's the classic stuff. I didn't even put it first. I'm putting it in the middle. That's like night sweats, which of course affects sleep, and daytime flushing. Night sweats and flushing, very disruptive in all sorts of ways. Some women could have 50 flushes during the week. You can imagine how disruptive that is if you're in a meeting and suddenly sweat is just pouring off of you, your clothes are sticking to you. So flushing is a problem. Now, I said I'm not going to talk about hormones yet, but of course I'm a big advocate for hormones. But we're going to talk about that in a separate episode. So you just, okay, I'm back. The only thing that fell was my cell phone. Okay, I'm where I was. Okay, now I had a little list. I don't want to miss anything. So the next thing that I have is vaginal dryness. That can start years before the last period happens, and that's often not even talked about. But that can also relate to low libido, low sex drive. And why would you have low sex drive? I've talked before about testosterone. Testosterone doesn't necessarily decline around menopause at all. It has nothing to do with menopause. 75% of all testosterone is directly or indirectly made, mostly close to 75%, by the adrenal gland, which isn't directly involved in menopause. And the ovaries don't decline their production of testosterone around menopause. It can decline as from the adrenal gland with general aging, but it's variable at the rate that it will happen. And some women don't and some do benefit from testosterone. We'll talk about that more. But in spite of testosterone, it has nothing to do with testosterone here, low libido, low sex drive, because estradiol is critical for sex drive. Many people don't know that. You've probably heard of the peptide oxytocin. Oxytocin is what enables women to have orgasm. It's the sort of love bonding peptide / hormone, and estradiol controls its production and receptor function. So that's a very important thing. We definitely need estradiol for optimal sexual function. In addition, estradiol is critical for the production of nitric oxide, which gives females the equivalent of an clitoral erection. It allows blood flow to the genital tissues so that you actually have sensation and function. So there's a multitude of ways that estradiol maintains optimal sexual functioning, and without estradiol, not that you have none, but you have decreasing amounts and fluctuating amounts, women have decreased sexual drive. Now, another thing, the heart. Now, the heart is very involved with the autonomic nervous system. That's what controls our electrical conduction system of the heart. And the autonomic nervous system is regulated by estradiol. The vagus has a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which will not be made properly or function properly without estradiol. So you have insufficient vagal tone, too much sympathetic. That's stress. And part of the stress response is a more rapid heartbeat. Palpitations are very common in women going through the perimenopause. And they will often go to cardiologists who put them on drugs called beta blockers, which will slow this electrical conduction system. Of course, estrogen can be used as a treatment, and many cardiologists don't know that, but now you know that. But there are other things that we can do as well. So we'll talk about that because that's what this episode is for. Now, the last thing I want to mention as far as symptoms, and this is not all exhaustive. If you want to look for every symptom, go to my book, Menopause 50 Things You Need to Know. Oh my gosh, it's so exhaustive on all the different symptoms and issues that women face through the different stages of menopause. But the next one I want to mention that you almost always notice because you look in the mirror, I know you do, it's skin aging. You know, the little wrinkles next to your eyes, between your eyebrows, in your forehead, above your lip, the creases, the nasolabial folds, that's these things, guys. They increase, and it starts typically in the early 40s. And as hormone levels drop. Why is that? Because estradiol and progesterone are heavily involved in skin health. All the skin structures have estrogen receptors and many progesterone receptors. And this becomes a problem when you don't have enough, which is what's happening during the perimenopause. And so this is why many women start having things like injections of fillers and Botox and plastic surgery because they notice these things are happening. And I'm not against any of those things. I just want to make things better till maybe you don't need them as much or maybe you don't need them at all. But I do understand that no one is happy when they see all the classic signs of aging. I totally get it. So skin aging is a very common issue. Now, I mentioned a whole bunch of symptoms of the perimenopause. Hormones are always a great option. We're not going to go there for right now. We're going to talk about that another time. Let's talk about some of the lifestyle things you can do. Well, some I already mentioned, like time-restricted eating. The master clock, which is drifting when you're in perimenopause, creating circadian rhythm dysfunction and a whole bunch of sequelae. If you feed your gut microbes and you have good microbial function and good microbial population, you will often have much better circadian rhythm. So what should you do? You should try as best you can to eat your biggest meal in the first half of the day. Ideal would be a big, healthy breakfast. Think of breakfast like dinner, only in the morning. Don't call it breakfast, call it morning meal. It can be any foods. Forget about classic breakfast foods. You can eat the healthy dinner for breakfast. I love breakfast salads where you put in all kinds of vegetables and beans and lentils and ancient grains in this beautiful salad, and you eat till you can't eat anymore. But say you don't want to do that first thing in the morning. Well, do it at lunch. Try to not have a late lunch and make lunch, if possible, your biggest meal. But do have a morning meal that is healthy, like maybe some ancient grains with nuts and seeds and fruit. You can also consider having like a chili, having a bowl of beans is great. Think about the English breakfast. They have eggs, and often they'll have roasted or grilled tomatoes. They'll have mushrooms, and they'll have beans. Like, that's covering a lot of bases there, whether you have the eggs or leave the eggs out, okay? But, think about a healthy breakfast if you can, and try to have a big, healthy lunch, and then a small, early dinner. That would be ideal for your circadian rhythm and to help prevent unwanted visceral fat weight gain, okay? So what else should we do? We should work on that stress. As I told you, the sympathetic system is on overload and the vagus nerve is not active enough. So you can take up any form of meditation, nature walks. I love vagus nerve stimulators that you can put next to your neck. There are also ear ones. In my practice, I recommend the Truvaga, which is a neck stimulator one. My personal favorite to lower sympathetic, increase parasympathetic are massages. I just love massages, but you can also do relaxing teas. What are some relaxing teas? Chamomile, that's an old standby. Holy basil, known as tulsi. Kava kava, which is great for anxiety. I also love ginger tea. I love cinnamon tea. They also have anti-inflammatory benefits, which is so important in the perimenopausal years as you're increasing inflammation. And what about the mitochondria? I mentioned that you don't have really great mitochondrial function when you don't have adequate estradiol. Well, there are some supplements now that have been shown to be mitochondrial boosters in a variety of ways. One is NMN, which is a precursor for NAD, which is a critical coenzyme in many functions in the body, including in the mitochondria creation of energy. And what about urolithin A? That is another wonderful supplement, and that directly can improve mitochondrial function. And nitric oxide supports supplements that can increase nitric oxide, which is also critical for mitochondrial function. And you want to have good insulin control. So you can consider like cinnamon, you can consider berberine, which is now pretty famous for its ability to help with gut microbiome dysbiosis, bad microbiome, and helping with glucose regulation and insulin sensitivity. So berberine is a great one for perimenopause. And what about for mood, like for that road rage without the road? Well, I particularly like bacopa. Bacopa is an Ayurvedic herb that not only makes you feel calmer, it's anti-anxiety, it also makes you smarter. And another one that's sort of the great calmer, if you're too hyper, it calms you. If you're too low, it brings you up. And that's ashwagandha, which is another wonderful herb that can also help you to fall asleep. And so that's another really excellent one. You can also do other supplements like lemon balm, Chinese skullcap, hops, and passion flower. These are all lovely herbals that are calming. And like I said, you can also get many of them in tea form. So these are all great things that you can do. And never underestimate the power of exercise. Exercise is like magic medicine. When they've done comparisons between exercise and antidepressive drugs like SSRIs, which do you think won? Exercise. When they compared exercise to metformin for insulin sensitivity improvement, exercise won. Exercise helps you to fall asleep. Exercise helps you to be strong and have more energy. And talking about falling asleep, sunlight. Get out and get some light into your eyeballs. That will have you increase serotonin, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter. There are direct lines of nerves that go straight from the retina that has light sensors right to the serotonin neurons to increase the production of serotonin. And what comes from serotonin? Melatonin, which has many effects, including promoting sleep. So there is so much you can do in terms of eating. I mentioned time-restricted eating. What about the choice of food? It turns out when your hormones are fluctuating and your estrogen is declining, your gut microbiome becomes altered and less optimal, and it can lead to leaky gut and gut dysbiosis. So you need to eat lots of plants with all the polyphenols, the phytoestrogens, and lots of fiber. Fiber is what the microbes eat. They ferment it. So you need to eat a high plant-based diet, including root vegetables, ancient grains, organic ancient grains, legumes, all kinds of beans and lentils, nuts and seeds. These actually help you lose weight, not gain weight. And don't forget fruit. Fruit has amazing fiber, antioxidants, and polyphenol. But incorporate the fruit into your meal itself. Don't eat it as a snack. In fact, stop snacking altogether. Don't eat more than 3 times in 24 hours, making the first half of the day the dominant food intake time of the day. Try to have that light, early dinner. Of course, no processed foods, no added sugars, no added chemicals. They're not good for anyone at any stage of life, and definitely not during the perimenopause. So perimenopause can last for 10 years before that final period, if you actually ever, see when that final period is, because you're not on hormones. Hormones are wonderful. We'll talk much more about hormones, but never forget lifestyle. Lifestyle includes so many tricks of the trade that can help you to optimize health at every stage, and very important during the perimenopausal years. So perimenopause doesn't have to be a time of misery. It's not mysterious. It's just hormonal shifts, hormonal fluctuations, and ultimately hormonal decline from the ovaries associated with declining fertility. So we can do it, gals. We can live a good life through the perimenopausal phase of life.